What's good, everyone? Jets takeoff. Joe Douglas finally answered the media after this past disastrous season, and Joe Douglas let a lot of the fans in the media know exactly what happened this season, and he spoke on a lot of interesting things. So what I did is I took 4 bullet points down, some of the main things that Joe Douglas said in his press conference that I think are very important and that should be talked about a lot more. The first thing was the issue of Zach Wilson and him being backup quarterback heading into the year. Joe Douglas in his conference basically said that, it didn't work out with Zach Wilson. The plan was to sit him, but is that really true? Because he was QB2. But he was saying that the Jets assumed that when Rodgers would be playing in the regular season, if he were to go down after, say, a few games, then Zach Wilson would have been able to see how Rodgers could have ran the offense during a live NFL regular season game, and multiple of them, and they thought that was going to make him better, but even Douglas admits that that did not happen at all, and by his press conference, it seems almost guaranteed that he will be traded. But Joe Douglas also said that there is a high probability that the Jets are going to be getting a veteran backup quarterback after last season. And you know what? Joe Douglas was in the wrong for rolling with Zach Wilson as quarterback too this past season, but it is a good thing to know that Joe Douglas finally understands that he has got to spend premium dollar on getting a true veteran backup quarterback who can run and operate this system as Aaron Rodgers maybe would, or at least give the Jets chances to compete and win with a guy who has experience commanding players on offense and being a leader, because the Jets lacked leadership, and a veteran backup quarterback provides that leadership and better play on the field than what we saw with Zach Wilson, even though he took some steps forward. So the second thing that Joe Douglas said in his press conference, or was talking about that, got my attention was when talking about the offensive line, because deservedly so, he deserves a lot of blame for the O-line. Heading into the season with Mekhi Becton and Dwayne Brown, 2 injury-prone tackles, and not having the best offensive line depth. And he addressed the depth being an issue. He said if he could go back, he would add more offensive linemen to the room heading into the start of the season, because the Jets got very thin as soon as players started dropping with injuries. He also said that his decisions did not work. And he also mentioned that availability is one of the best abilities. He didn't say that quote for quote, but he did say that availability is extremely important when it comes to the offensive line. So when he says that, he's clearly referencing Dwayne Brown. I think that's pretty obvious. Could be Connor McGovern he's referencing too. But also the right guard position, because that position was in turmoil for all of the season. And Douglas was basically saying how there's no continuity. And availability is something that has to get settled down when he adds new offensive linemen to this room, because there's going to be a lot of changes because, obviously the Jets have to win this season and actually protect Rodgers or the backup quarterback if, God forbid, Rodgers gets hurt again. But because Douglas said that availability is very important to him, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that because Joe Douglas realizes after this season how important availability is, that Laken Tomlinson will probably be brought back for his last year on his contract, and that the Jets are going to roll. The Jets are going to roll with Laken Tomlinson instead of saving $12 million. I think it is. Do I agree with it fully? No. I think the Jets can improve and get better, but Laken Tomlinson has started every game since he's been a New York Jet, and Douglas clearly values availability after this past season, where it seems like nobody was available except for Mekhi Becton and Laken Tomlinson, obviously. So that is pretty telling. And yeah, that's kind of my prediction, is that Laken Tomlinson will be brought back because he is the only offensive lineman that has truly been available for almost his entire Jets career. Another thing that Joe Douglas talked about, this is the third thing, is that he mentioned the playmakers, and specifically he talked about how Garrett Wilson, he wants to take the pressure off his shoulders, because obviously we all know it as Jets fans. Garrett Wilson is the only true wide receiver that poses a threat to opposing offenses, because Allen Lazard did not work out. Garrett Wilson's a stud, but because he's so good and the Jets have such a talent discrepancy on the roster, teams just try to take away Garrett Wilson and then the Jets are screwed. So from what Douglas was saying in his press conference, if you watch the video, it seems pretty clear and obvious that the Jets are going to add another wide receiver to the room. Will that be in free agency or the draft? I don't know. That was not talked upon in this press conference, but you could 1,000,000% gauge that Joe Douglas is not going to be not adding a very good wide receiver to the room, because it's very clear, and he knows it, because he also admits that Allen Lazard did not play up to his standards this past season. He said he expects him to bounce back, but I think Joe Douglas, even himself, knows it's way too risky to bank on that happening. So obviously that opens up the door for free agency. Mike Evans, T. Higgins, who knows, trade for Devontae Adams. Those are kind of the big three that are really talked about. We don't know which one's going to happen, but it's very clear that wide receiver will be addressed by Joe Douglas's press conference comments in today's end of the year press conference. The last thing I have for you guys is that Bryce Huff. Bryce Huff has been one of the better Jets stories this past season. He's always been underrated. His Jets career, starting in 2020, that's when while he wasn't on the field as much as he was this past season, his pass rushing numbers were always there. But this year he finally got a lot more playing time, and he showed it. But when asked about Bryce Huff and wanting to bring him back, it seemed like Douglas, not necessarily that he was dodging the question, but he was non-committal to keeping Bryce Huff. And he also he said that this is the tough part about football, is the business side of it, when referring to giving him a contract extension. And that doesn't sound like Bryce Huff is a priority in the Jets' free agency plans, because later on in that same segment, he also started to talk about how they need to go over their review with the coaches and talk about the plan heading into next season and which players fit that or not. And given the fact that the Jets love to rotate defensive linemen and that they drafted Will McDonald in last year's NFL draft, it seems like the Jets are not going to be extending Bryce Huff to a long-term contract. But he was asked about the franchise tag, didn't give an answer there, said it's too early. Is it a possibility the Jets tag and trade Bryce Huff? I think absolutely that is a real possibility. But from my understanding and by watching this press conference and how Douglas was talking about Bryce Huff, to me, I didn't really get the vibe that Bryce Huff is going to be brought back for sure, or that he's at the top of the Jets' priority list at all. So those are the four things that really stood out to me in this Joe Douglas press conference. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything specific, whether it's backup quarterback, Zach Wilson, offensive line issues, his comment about Robert Saleh, which I didn't talk about, where he said that he believes Saleh is the right guy because he's a good man. I mean, that was a little too comical, but let me know what you think about this press conference. I think it was okay. It seemed like he did admit and acknowledge his losses and his mistakes this past season, which, I'm so angry at Joe Douglas because he truly wasted this past season for Jets fans. But you know what? If he admits his faults and he understands them and does the exact opposite of them next season, then you know what? At least maybe it was for something. Maybe. So let me know, Jets fans, what do you think? And yeah, I'd love to... I can't speak. My bad. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace.